Exodus! Hey everyone, I'm Reverend Jim. This is the whole Bible, the series where we go through the whole Bible from beginning to end. We are in the book of Exodus now, and we're reading it all from a progressive and liberative point of view. So if you're offended by me saying the whole Bible, you might be offended by some other things we talk about because we're going to get into it. Exodus. Now, when you think of the book of Exodus, chances are a couple different images come to mind. Maybe it's this one, or maybe it's this one. Kind of depends on which generation you grew up watching the Bible brought to life on the big screen, or the small screen, or whatever size screen you have. Anyway, we're going to look at some things from both of those because they have some interesting accuracies when it comes to just reading the words on the page, and they make some interesting choices. We'll get into all that over the next few weeks of these videos. This video is Exodus, specifically Exodus chapters 1 through 3. And this is kind of the prologue to the action that we really see in those movies and in all the flannel graphs of Sunday school. These chapters, Exodus 1 through 3, you could call them Moses' origin story. Every good superhero has an origin story, right?
Spider Pig does whatever a Spider Pig does.
Maybe. Well, this one is Moses. So Moses gets 3 chapters really dedicated to how he became the Moses we know. These chapters and Exodus itself also becomes the foundation of liberation theology. That's because Exodus 1 through 3 marks a dramatic shift from the family story of Genesis, where we've been following, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all of that. We shift from the family story of Genesis to a political liberation narrative. These chapters introduce Israel as an enslaved people. Previously, they were a wandering people. Don't worry, they're going to wander again. And now they're enslaved within an imperial system. It situates Exodus as Israel's foundational memory of identity and faith. That's key, not just for what we're going to be exploring in these chapters in Exodus, but for how we read this whole Bible. The whole thing. This story of Exodus is Israel's foundational memory of identity and faith. That's mostly because a lot of what we have here in the Hebrew scriptures, the Torah specifically, really was codified when these people were exiled again in Babylon. So we go kind of from Exodus to exile as kind of the bookends, and they're really in exile in the future, according to where we are in the narrative, looking back to Exodus and seeing a bit of, if God did it then, maybe God will do it now. But all this to say, Exodus is Israel's foundational memory of identity and faith. So is exile, by the way. The two kind of get conflated, it seems. But this Exodus story frames Pharaoh as the embodiment of systemic oppression rather than merely an individual villain. He's not just the bad guy in the story. He is systemic oppression personified. Follow? All right, let's take a look at these 3 specific chapters and kind of get a sense of what they contain and what they're about. The first one, Exodus chapter 1. This is empire and resistance. This is where Israel is growing, and that growth threatens Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh responds with forced labor and genocidal violence. Now, this liberation begins quietly in these chapters specifically as midwives and women resist the empire by choosing life over fear. This is really where the story begins. It's not about the grand let my people go, but it's about the subtle yet significant moves of midwives and women resisting empire as they insist on continuing to carry life even if Pharaoh called for death. Chapter 2, we have survival and calling. This kind of continues. Moses is saved through the courage of women across class and ethnicity. All the kids are supposed to be killed. That's what Pharaoh's edict was. You gotta love when those are the Sunday school stories. This Bible is definitely not rated G. Okay, so Moses, though, is saved through the courage of women across class and ethnicity and grows up navigating both privilege and oppression. So he is, sent down the Nile in the reed basket, and he's found by the Pharaoh's daughter. That's how the story goes. So this chapter gives us his birth, his rescue in the Nile, and then he grows up. And we don't really know a lot about the growing up. The Prince of Egypt, all the movies kind of give us some, fan fiction of it all. But we do see in this chapter that Moses, as an adult, kills an Egyptian and flees. Really what's going on here, and this is how I kind of put it together, Moses had the sense that he was the one who was going to save the people, so he's going to begin the revolt, and he kills one of the Egyptians, only he's found out and he's afraid he's going to get caught for murder, so he runs away. Also interesting kind of rendition of Moses already. Get to know a lot about the character. He's trying to take matters into his own hands, doesn't quite work the way he thinks it should, and so he runs away. So Moses encounters the limits of violence and the long road towards liberative leadership. A lot going on in this chapter. But ultimately, what we've done so far is we set the stage for who Pharaoh is and the systemic oppression that he's imposing upon the people out of his own fear. These women and midwives who subvert that power and genocide, and they find ways for life to flourish and thrive, one of them being Moses. And then we get Moses growing up trying to take matters into his own hands and it not going so well, and he leaves, leaving everyone else to continue to suffer. And that brings us to chapter 3. Really, chapters 1 and 2 get us chapter 3. That's how numbers work. Number 1 leads to 2, leads to 3. I think you knew that. But narratively, we got a lot going on. Chapter 3. This is Moses. I think the story tells us he was 40 years old when he fled, and then he spent 40 years in the wilderness in his, self-imposed exile. And then this moment here is the end of that second 40. So we're 80 years into Moses' life, and we're just 3 chapters into the book. But chapter 3, this is the one that you've probably heard versions of before. This is the story of holy liberation. Specifically, it's God meeting Moses in the burning bush, revealing divine solidarity with the suffering and commissioning Moses to go confront Pharaoh. Now, there's a lot going on in this particular chapter. The Bible in a Minute video we'll watch later, you'll hear me kind of go into some of it because this is one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. Oh, it's so good. Radical eminence. When did the ground become holy? The ground was always holy. That's a nod because God tells Moses, take off your sandals because you're standing on holy ground. The ground was always holy, only we're too busy looking for lost sheep that we miss out on what's in front of us the whole time. Okay, so this moment here in chapter 3, This moment here in chapter 3, Moses says, who am I going to say sent me? And God says, I am that I am, the great I am line from the Bible. And God's name expresses enduring presence. I am that I am. I will be what I will be. Not domination. This grounds liberation in a relationship and in faithfulness, in that sense of presence, not of power over. But what's really going on, what we see in this, is that God hears the cry. That's a phrase we see in this chapter. God hears the cry of the oppressed. And that's how the story of Exodus begins. God hears the cry of the oppressed and acts decisively in history. Liberation begins not with Moses, but with the women, the midwives, the everyday acts of resistance. Their names are Shipporah and Puah, Moses' mother and sister, Pharaoh's daughter, all these women who we see in these early chapters who defy empire through their courage and compassion. And then it's Moses' call in Exodus 3 that reveals a God who identifies with that suffering. I have seen, I have heard, and whose name, I am who I am, signals divine presence and faithfulness rather than control. These chapters announce that God sides with the enslaved, confronts unjust powers, and calls reluctant human partners into the work of liberation. Not bad for 3 chapters, huh? A little more than you probably got in the Prince of Egypt or the 10 Commandments, but this is how the whole book begins. Okay, let's take 3 minutes, watch 3 videos. You're going to hear Reverend Ben Perry, Reverend Cameron Trimble, and me, Reverend Jim Keat, talking about chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll have a few questions after these videos. Here we go.
This is Bible in a Minute, Exodus chapter 1. So at the beginning of the book of Exodus, we find the Israelites enslaved by the Egyptians, and Pharaoh gives an order to kill all of their sons. But Pharaoh's daughter conspires against him and sends 2 of her handmaidens to save baby Moses, sending him down the river in a basket. What I find interesting about this story is when it's been historically read in the US by white Christians, we have imagined ourselves into the role of Israel, the oppressed group needing to enact God's liberation. But if we look at the reality of how white Christians have acted in this country, we are not Israel. We are Egypt. And the question becomes, how can we act like Pharaoh's daughter and betray the empire that is oppressing God's people?
Bible in a Minute, Exodus chapter 2. They're 2 Levites. They have a baby. The baby's named Moses. Baby's mom decides that Moses should be hidden in a papyrus basket in reeds so that the Pharaoh's daughter discovers the baby. And this happens. And so she raises the baby in Pharaoh's court. The baby grows up, as babies do. And then he's going out on the street one day and he sees 2 guys fighting. And one is an Egyptian and one's a Hebrew guy. And he says, this will not do. And so he kills the Egyptian guy. No conflict mediation skills whatsoever. And he buries the guy and he thinks he's gotten away with it. But then he goes back out and there are 2 Hebrew guys fighting and he says, what's what's up with this? And they say, are you going to kill us like you did the Egyptian guy? And Moses is like, oh no, they actually know. And so he runs away. He ends up in this place called Midian, and he runs into the 7 daughters of the priest of Midian, and he ends up getting invited to dinner, and then he stays a little longer. He gets married to one of them, and then the chapter ends where it says the king of Egypt dies, and the Israelites cry out from the oppression of slavery, and God hears their cries.
Bible in a Minute, Exodus chapter 3. Moses, the former prince of Egypt, is out with the sheep, searching for that pesky speckled one who keeps wandering off when he passes by a bush that's burning, a common occurrence given all the sun-baked shrubs in the desert. The next day is more of the same, herding a wandering sheep back to the flock, and there's another burning bush. Or is it the same one? Nah, it couldn't be. Day after day, the same events repeat themselves. Sheep, burning bush. Sheep, another burning bush? Wait, it's the same burning bush? So he walks closer to take a look at this supernatural shrub, and that's when he hears a voice. Take off your shoes, for you're standing on holy ground. You see, the bush is always burning, only we tend to be consumed by our day-to-day, and we miss it. The ground was already holy. Sometimes we just need to wiggle our toes and feel it. The invitation is to slow down, to notice God already here, radically imminent, as close as your very breath. All right, the first question is always, what do you notice? What stands out to you? Notice what you notice. That's kind of the biggest foundation for this whole way of reading the Bible, is taking an actual look at the words on the page. And we're not to say we're reading it literally, but we're going to take it seriously. And I think part of that is just noticing what even kind of rises to the surface as you take a slower and closer look at these texts. And then here are 3 specific questions, just in case that might be helpful as well. What do the midwives teach us about moral courage and faithful disobedience? Ooh, we gotta love phrases like that. What does Moses' act of violence reveal about the dangers of liberating through force alone? Whew, yeah. And last, what does it mean to encounter God in holy ground within ordinary or marginal spaces? Oh, so much, so good. Quite a few things to think about. Leave a comment down below with how you are processing all of this and what's going on as we talk about these first 3 chapters of Exodus. Next week, we'll be back with another video, Exodus 4 through 6, when Moses returns to Egypt. Oh, it's going to get good. This is where it kind of picks up with the movie a little bit, so buckle up. It's going to be good. I'll see you next week.